what should my margins be? I'm in a service industry. So this is so interesting because actually 2 people within the past couple of weeks asked me this question. One was in a for-profit structure and one was in a nonprofit structure. And they both came to me with that particular question. I just thought that was really interesting. So of course the answer is it depends, but I will tell you my take on what it depends on. It depends what your margins could be, and I don't want to say should be, but could be, depends on, for example, where your organization is in its life cycle. At certain points in the organizational life cycle, you're going to reinvest a lot of money in future growth. That decreases profit margins. At certain other points in the organizational life cycle, you're going to keep on keeping on. And in other parts, you might have different priorities. For example, if you're running a for-profit business, there may be some times in the organizational life cycle where you want to minimize tax liability, income tax liability. So if you're going to spend on something anyway, you accelerate the spending. Bring it into the earlier calendar year rather than the later one. Sometimes you're going to want to show a more attractive profit in other stages in your business life cycle. So you're going to want to increase your profit by, let's say, deferring spending to a future year, or, oh, hey Dee, welcome, so glad to see you here. So for example, if you're planning an exit, then you're going to want to increase your profit margin, right? You're not necessarily going to reinvest tons of money in business growth. Maybe you want to show some steadiness rather than invest in things that are going to be harvested by someone else, or requiring, or then under the new leadership, just at the time that it's supposed to be bearing fruit, and under new leadership, it's not going to bear fruit as effectively, for example. So you may want to increase profit margins, reinvest less if you're in that 3 to 5 years pre-exit window. So in part, it depends on where you are in your organizational life cycle. Another aspect of it is the end goals. Do you want to run this thing until you say one day, I'm done running it, I'm going to step away, and that was a beautiful chapter and that's all over with? Or that was an ugly chapter and it's all over with, whatever it is that you might say. Excuse me. Pardon. Hey Lisa, it's great to see you. Okay, so you have where you are in the organizational life cycle. You have your goals. Do you want to run this steady until you die? Do you want to sell it one day? Do you want to have something just as a side hustle, or something that's like a quasi volunteer gig? All of these things affect where it makes sense for your margins to be. If you're in a high growth mode, you're going to expect lower margins because, again, you're reinvesting profits back into the organization to help it grow. And now it didn't specify in this question whether we're talking about gross margins or net margins, but so what I've been focusing on here is net margins, and what that means is revenue minus all expenses, not just revenue minus direct expenses. So those are some of the things worth considering. And the final thing which I want to mention right now is the risk profile that you want to take on. So as your organization is operating and growing to whatever extent you want it to grow, the more risk you take on in terms of, let's say, personnel, you might be able to save some money but take on additional risk. The less risk your organization is willing to take on, the more you may have to pay out. So you have 2 typical examples like that. One, if you're going to have more insurances in place or fewer insurances in place. More coverage, less coverage, right? So you have like liability insurance and key person insurance and all kinds of insurances under the sun you can have protecting the organization. That will decrease your margins, but it will also decrease risk. You have, for example, compensation. If you have a compensation plan that's all direct compensation, you may have to, and what I mean by that is the people working in your organization get paid a % of gross revenues. That's less risky for your organization, so you're going to have a lower profit margin because you pay out more money to the people doing the work, to the people providing the services. You're going to pay them a higher rate because your organization is taking on, is avoiding risk by only paying variable compensation instead of a flat rate. I've seen organizations who pay their salespeople 65% commission, but there's no base pay. So they're paying out a lot, but they're not risking anything. For every dollar that comes in the door, they're paying out 65%. Those are pretty low profit margins, but they're not on the hook for 5-6 figure salaries for their sales team. So the risk profile of the organization is another factor to consider.